Social distancing measures to be relaxed from Friday, allowing groups of 4 in public and at restaurants. Government considers travel bubble agreements with 11 countries. And democracy activist Tam Tak-chi charged with sedition.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the main news. Social distancing measures are being relaxed starting Friday amid the falling number of COVID-19 infections.
More businesses will be allowed to open up, while gatherings of up to 4 people will be permitted. Here's Kana Chu.
With the continuing decline of coronavirus cases, Hong Kong is inching closer to normalcy by allowing the resumption of more social and economic activities.
We reckon there is still silent chains of infection in the community because of these unlinked cases. So we have adopted a more sophisticated and also refined approach that we continue to assess the situation sort of like every 7 days instead of 14 days.
Under relaxed social distancing rules starting Friday, restaurants will be allowed to seat a maximum of 4 people per table, up from 2 currently permitted. Various recreation venues such as game centers, mahjong parlors, and sports premises can return to business as well. That's in addition to performance venues, although their usage will be confined to rehearsals only. Also point to reopen are ice skating rinks, where group practices must adhere to the 4 people gathering limit. With an exception to the science and space museums, 14 public libraries, museums, and cultural facilities will be accessible again next week. The government says a further lifting of measures can be expected if the virus situation improves a week following the implementation of the latest regulations. This means suspended businesses like saunas, karaoke parlors, party rooms, and nightclubs could resume operations on September 18th at the earliest. The same goes for the city's 2 theme parks and convention and exhibition center.
In considering the factors of who comes first and what is the priority, not only are we considering the epidemic situation, we are also considering the necessity of the activity, as well as whether they are essential to daily lives.
Until further notice, people will continue to be required to wear face masks on public transport and at designated public areas. Kana Chu, TVB News.
The government expects that social distancing limits could be lifted for theme parks and exhibitions as soon as 10 days from now.
The city has also resumed its travel bubble plan with quarantine exemptions for travelers. Dong Yeonye has more.
Hopeful news for those eager to explore in and out of the city. Hong Kong is planning to remove social distancing curbs for theme parks and exhibitions as soon as next Friday.
We hope that we can give advance notice so when they resume their activities, they can make the relevant preparatory arrangements.
The government is also in touch with 11 countries to form travel bubbles, which will allow citizens from both sides to travel under relaxed or no quarantine limits. About half of them have shown an interest to participate, including Japan, Thailand, and Germany. But some of these countries, such as France, are still reporting many new COVID-19 cases. Authorities say there will be no compromise on health safety.
If, for instance, at the very last moment, even when things are ready, if the health authority would have reservation on sort of lifting the ban, I think we will, of course, err on the safe side.
But Yao could not give a timetable on when the air bridges could be formed,
which include pre-boarding tests, which must be mutually recognized by the respective sort of health authorities. I mentioned about the double insurance by having, upon arrival, port health checking, plus any additional measures.
But the travel sector is not as confident.
I don't think a lot of people were going out and coming in. I expect if we can have 50%, of the past number, I will be very, very happy.
Edward Yao said the travel bubble plan would start with a smaller scale of people with a strong urge to travel, while business travelers might be among the first to get the green light. Dong Yang TVB News.
3 new local COVID-19 cases were reported today, the lowest since mid-July. Another 3 infections were imported from Ukraine and the Philippines.
The death toll, meanwhile, stands at 99 after one more elderly patient died from the virus. Jackie Lin reports.
2 of the 3 new local cases are linked to the virus-stricken Transport City building in Taiwan. They include a family member of an earlier infected security guard who had a sore throat last week and was diagnosed later with COVID-19. Another patient is a cleaner who tested positive during quarantine.
She's asymptomatic, so I think there's a risk for her because we don't know when she got the disease. So that's why we test all the tenants of the whole building. We give out more than 400 different saliva bottles for them to test.
All offices and shops on the building's 6th floor have been shuttered after infections emerged among 1/3 of its tenants there. The last local infection of the day was detected through the community testing program, a 68-year-old housewife who lives in Two Moon's Anting estate. She frequented the wet markets and a shopping mall nearby. Meanwhile, an update on an earlier infected Thai man who was held at the Castle Peak Bay Immigration Center. Police discovered that the detainee met a COVID patient mid-July who might be the source of his infection. Despite a downward trend in the number of cases, the mass testing scheme has been extended till Friday, and the government is considering a further 3-day extension. Also, at least 1,500 people have been tested more than once in a supposedly one-off testing program. But Chief Executive Carrie Lam said the proportion is relatively low and didn't think it was a big deal. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Pro-democracy activist Tam Tak-chi has become the first person to be charged under colonial-era sedition laws since the handover. His case is stirring controversy over issues such as freedom of speech.
But the chief executive warned those freedoms are not absolute and have limits. Pinky Wong reports.
Supporters were at the Fanland Magistrate Courts this afternoon, where Vice Chairman of the Pro-Democracy People Power Group, Tam Tak-chi, was at. He was detained for around 48 hours after the police National Security Unit arrested him and searched his residence. Tam faces 3 charges in relation to a rally objected by the police at the Tai Po Waterfront Park on January 17th. They include 1 count of inciting others to participate in an unauthorized assembly, 1 count of uttering seditious words, and 1 count of disorderly conduct in a public place. Tam also faces 5 counts of using seditious words when he allegedly spread hatred and contempt against the government online and in street booths in July. He also faces 1 count of disorderly conduct in a public place in a Nautau Kok Mall in March. Magistrate So Man Long denied the prosecution's request for all charges to be heard during the same court session. The case is adjourned to November 17th, and Tam was rejected bail. Chief Executive Carrie Lam was asked about the matter before today's Executive Council meeting. She was asked whether a colonial-era law will be used to target opposition activists.
There isn't a distinction between the age of a law, so to speak, whether a law is pre-1997 or post-1997. The law is still valid. If there is evidence that someone has breached the law, then the law enforcement authorities will have to take action. There has nothing to do with freedom of speech. As I have said again on many occasions, including in explaining provisions in the national security law, yes, we uphold the freedoms and rights enjoyed by Hong Kong people under the Basic Law, but one will have to realize that whether in the International Covenants or the Bill of Rights Ordinance, exercising of some of the rights is not without limits. For example, in safeguarding national security,
Pinky Wong, TVB News.
12 Hong Kongers who tried to escape to Taiwan last month are now being held in a detention center in Shenzhen. They were arrested by mainland authorities after their speedboat was intercepted off the coast of Guangdong. Sources say they were involved in last year's protests, and some have been charged in connection with rioting and violating the national security law.
The question is not a question of simple getting back, because if these Hong Kong residents were arrested for bridging mainland offenses, then they have to be dealt with according to the mainland laws, in accordance with the jurisdiction, before any other things could happen.
The last two journalists who had been working for Australian media in China are now safely back in Australia.
They were rushed out of the country after police demanded interviews with them and temporarily blocked their departures. After an unnerving week in China, safety and relief for two Australian correspondents.
It's such a relief to be home, so really happy.
Did you feel wet at all when you were over there?
A little bit, yes.
Michael Smith from the Australian Financial Review and ABC's Bill Birtles flew from Shanghai last night.
Relieved to be back in the country with genuine rule of law.
Both had sheltered in Australian diplomatic compounds after incidents last week. The men say police officers appeared at their homes in Beijing and Shanghai telling them they were persons of interest in an investigation into Australian citizen Cheng Lei, a business news anchor for CGTN. During wide-ranging questioning that touched on the Hong Kong national security law, Birtles told police he did not know Cheng well, while Smith had met her once in his life.
So it sort of felt to me like the whole episode was about harassment. China is heading in an increasingly authoritarian trend. We've seen that year after year, and I think it will help Australians and everybody just be more and more clear-eyed about the nature of the Chinese government in its current state.
Australian authorities confirmed they helped get the men home, adding the detention of Cheng was part of the reason they advised the journalists to leave. The foreign minister says Australia will not retaliate by revoking the visas of Chinese journalists working in Australia.
Unless individuals are breaching laws in Australia, then that would not be an approach that we would take.
The foreign ministry in Beijing said today Cheng is detained on suspicion of endangering China's national security, adding authorities strictly adhered to the law during investigations. Already strained relations between the countries over telecom giant Huawei have worsened since Australia called for an independent inquiry into the origins of and international responses to the coronavirus pandemic. Still ahead in tonight's news. Former teacher to appeal jail sentence for assaulting a cop. Tensions rise again in border standoff between China and India. And Julian Assange fights extradition to America.
Welcome back. A primary school teacher convicted of kicking a police officer during a protest last year was given a 9-week jail term today.
He was released on bail pending his appeal. Caleb Leung has more.
29-year-old Yeung Pok Man appeared at the Fanling Magistracy this morning for his sentencing. He was earlier convicted of assaulting a police officer during a protest on November 11th last year. Yeung was accused of kneeing an officer in the stomach after he was stopped in Shangshui for driving his vehicle too slowly. In mitigation, Yeung's lawyer said pre-sentencing reports concluded that Yeung did not suffer from any mental illness. The lawyer added that his client had been laid off by the school where he worked after the incident. But the school's principal praised Yeung as a responsible and passionate person. The defense lawyer urged the court to pass a non-custodial sentence. However, Magistrate Debbie Ng stressed that assaulting a police officer is a serious crime. The court has a responsibility to protect officers who are carrying out their duties. Although this is the defendant's first offense, it's unavoidable for the court to hand down a prison sentence. After reviewing Young's psychiatric reports, the magistrate also concluded that the defendant did not exhibit a trace of reflection or remorse. Young was given a 9-week jail sentence, but has been released on bail pending an appeal. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Authorities are looking for a gunman who shot a man in Chim Sha Tsui last night over an alleged triad-linked dispute. Around midnight, a motorcyclist ran up to a private car and fired a gun. He attempted to shoot again before the car drove off. The victim drove himself to Queen Elizabeth Hospital, colliding with 3 taxis on the way. Sources say the man is a triad leader and is out of life-threatening danger after treatment.
Overseas again, tensions between India and China over a disputed Himalayan border region have taken another twist. China said Indian forces crossed into its territory and fired warning shots at a Chinese patrol. Beijing calls the move serious military provocation and a violation of their agreements. India rejected the allegations and accused Chinese troops of firing in the air during the face-off. Neither side reported any casualties. The nuclear-armed rivals have been engaged in a tense standoff in the cold desert Ladakh region. Things escalated in mid-June when Indian and Chinese troops engaged in hand-to-hand fighting. 20 Indian soldiers were killed. China did not report any casualties. Defense ministers from each country met Friday in Moscow in an effort to ease tensions.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange appeared in a London court to fight a U.S. extradition request. Prosecutors argue he should be tried in America for publishing thousands of classified documents.
Supporters are calling his prosecution a threat to freedom of the press. Peter Coveas has details.
After more than a year and a half in a British prison, Julian Assange made his way to court. Inside, the 49-year-old formally refused a U.S. extradition request. The judge rejected his lawyer's application for the case to be adjourned until January to allow more time to consider new U.S. accusations. The court said they had ample time as the case was delayed months due to the pandemic. Assange's lawyers and his supporters say the prosecution is a politically motivated abuse of power that will stifle press freedom.
Well, it's an abuse trial. It's just an abuse. Also, it's extraterritorial application of laws. Also, the First Amendment. Julian is a publisher, a publication is WikiLeaks, and a journalist. It's an oppression of journalism and free press everywhere in the Western world.
U.S. authorities accused the Australian-born Assange of conspiring to hack government computers and of violating an espionage law. American prosecutors have indicted him on 18 espionage and computer misuse charges. They pertain to the publication of U.S. military documents a decade ago. The charges carry a maximum 175 years in prison. Assange spent almost 7 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and fathered 2 children with his partner while inside. He was dragged out over a year ago after Ecuador revoked his asylum. Supporters say the ordeal has harmed Assange's physical and mental health.
For 10 years, the courts have been playing football with Julian's head.
Assange's legal troubles began in 2010 when he was arrested in London at the request of Sweden. They wanted to question him about allegations of rape and sexual assault made by 2 women. He refused to go to Stockholm, fearing extradition or illegal rendition to the United States. Sweden dropped the sex crimes investigations in November 2019 because so much time had elapsed. Assange remains in jail depending on the outcome of the U.S. extradition request. Peter Coveas, TVB News.
Wildfires have now burned more than 2 million acres in California this year, a state record. Crews are battling dozens of growing blazes amid sweltering temperatures and dry winds as they warn more residents to prepare for evacuation.
The situation that we have right now is a life-threatening situation with the weather forecast that we have for the next 3 days. We really need you to pay attention to any instructions on evacuation as the fire is likely to move south towards 6 communities. There's a lot of people, a lot of property, to the south of this fire right now.
2 of the 3 largest fires in state history are burning in the San Francisco Bay Area. Nearly 15,000 firefighters are battling those fires and about 24 others around California. The electrical grid is strained, threatening power outages for millions. 8 people have died and thousands of buildings are destroyed. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.
Good night.